right, hand in hand with what you just heard, we're going to hear from Matt Mason about how to wake up the silent majority, which is us, frankly.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Mason, and tonight we're going to talk about the two things that we have always been told not to talk about in public, politics and religion. But awakening the silent majority. Who are the silent majority? Why are they silent? And how do we awaken them or get them to become more involved? Well, according to Gallup polls, 20% of Americans consider themselves to be liberals, 36% moderates, and 40% conservatives. I don't know about you, but I don't see a majority of numbers, a majority of voters in these numbers. There's no majority block of voters. But whether you're conservative or liberal doesn't necessarily mean that you're left or right, or even right or wrong. And it especially doesn't mean that you're a Democrat or Republican. 44% of those polled also said that they lean towards being Democrat. 40% lean towards being Republican. If we consider just 25% of those leaners to be moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, we see that we do have a majority in this country. We are mostly moderate. But who's running the country? It's like watching a tug of war, only the far left and right are on the ropes. Middle America is hanging from a thread, being dragged through the mud. The world of 24/7, 365 news is a very complicated place. We're seeing an ever-increasing amount of media bombarding us all the time. So we limit our exposure. We prioritize scan and sift so we can, well, sleep. Here I'd like to thank Joe for making my point in the slides. I'm just going to stand quietly while you remember everything he just said. Headlines are better at grabbing our attention, so there's no need for the truth or accountability. But politics and religion have really become spectator sports in this country. With no debate and no discourse over what's happening in our country, there's no way to forego change other than blame. I'm right and you're wrong, period. But what difference can we make when gerrymandering manipulates the redistricting process, when legislation can be held hostage by special interests and lobbyists? In 2008 and 2010, the number of people that showed up to vote were 62% and 42% respectively. These are eligible voters. These are not the number of people that showed up. These are percentage of eligible voters. It's hard to imagine a mandate in any election where less than 50% of the people show up to vote. But that's what our leaders are doing. They're declaring mandates of the people by virtue of having received the most number of votes cast, not the most number of votes of eligible voters. So we've become bombarded by the media, the political rhetoric, and even our own feeling of not being able to have a voice. So we see and hear no benefit to being involved. So we don't speak out, even when it directly affects our lives. So we've become detached and indifferent, tuned out and turned off. Several years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. when I was embarrassed by a conversation I had with a British couple. I couldn't explain our election process. Can you? Can any of you? Do you know who your representatives are in government? It's time for us to re-educate ourselves about the Constitution and the branches of government and the roles they play in our everyday lives. It's time for us to embrace our core values, basic human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, and yes, even freedom of religion. We have to be willing to accept the rights of others to think differently than we do. For the good of all, we need to agree to disagree on things so that we can move on. We don't all have to think the same way in order to be the same members of society. Demand something different. When your choice of candidates is the lesser of two evils, or who the hell cares, demand something different. When campaign nepotism manipulates the elections, demand something different. We don't have to change our government. We get to change our government. Old Glory needs a new coat of paint. It's time for us to start listening to each other, open, honest debate, and then get out and vote. Because if you're not part of the solution and you're not involved in the process, you don't get to complain about the results. Don't take for granted the rights that others have died for. Join the conversation and debate of ideas at mostlymoderate.com. I'd like to thank the members of our armed forces for all of their service in this country, and I'd like to thank all of you for having me here tonight.